The podcast you're about to listen to may contain objectionable language, adult and/or immature content, mentions of Jesus Christ, and unironic readings of holy Christian scriptures. If any of this is likely to offend you in a manner that you find less than enjoyable, maybe don't listen.
Hi, I'm Pastor Bob Schaefer.
And I'm Pastor Eric Damon. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to CPTB, which doesn't stand for Capone on the phone taking bribes.
Oh, let's do that one this week.
Maybe next week.
All right.
What it does stand for is Comedians with Pastors Talking Bible, and it is just what it sounds like. Every other week, Pastor Eric and I invite two working comedians to spend an hour with us kicking around a passage from the Bible.
For any new listeners, could you tell them how we pick which passage from the Bible we're going to talk about?
Yes, we use the RCL. That stands for the Revised Common Lectionary, and it's a cycle of readings for every single Sunday of the year. Lots of churches all around the world use the RCL readings, including your church and my church.
So in other words, we're going to talk about the readings we have to preach about. We've brought in comics, put no fence around them. We're going to let them say whatever they want to say, and we've decided this is a good plan.
Yeah, I guess we did. But we're going to find out. And you know what? If it works, we're going to get a new lens on the scriptures for working preachers like us, and we're going to get an engaging Bible study for anybody who cares to listen. And we're going to get some honest laughs for absolutely everyone, because we all need those. And then if it doesn't work out, we're just going to offend everyone. Like absolutely every single person who listens.
Good times.
Yeah, and we're going to hear about that, but I'm going to make sure you take the heat.
I'll do that. That's fine. All right. Well, before we talk to our comedians who are back from last episode, could you explain what our stance on the Bible as ELCA pastors is for anybody who might be new?
Yeah. Yep, I missed that. Our stance on the Bible is that we take it very seriously. The Bible is understood to be the inspired and authoritative source and norm of our proclamation of Jesus Christ. We treat it with a lot of respect, and we use it as the ruler for everything about how we teach and how we preach and how we follow Jesus. But we also try really hard to remember that it's the Bible that points us to Jesus, and it's not the other way around.
And this week we've got Trevor Austin and Ellen Lundie back to talk with us. And Ellen is, as we said last time, you're also an ELCA pastor, so you are bound by your ordination vows to hold the same views of the Bible as we.
Yeah, I feel like I've taken over a little bit because, Eric, you're a comic as well. Yeah. And so when it's you and Bob into comics, you can kind of go, it's half and half, or that could be 3 versus 1, or 2 versus. I can't do math, but I feel like. So I'm doing like the same hybrid role, and so we can have like majorities however we want, and it's poor Bob and Trevor that have to deal with like being just the one thing.
You're sort of like the ace in blackjack, where you're either a 1 or an 11, however we need to.
I'm not good at blackjack either, so yeah.
But we've got Trevor Austin to say hello. We've got you back with us.
Yes, maybe we can discuss gluttony. One episode was not enough, so I'm a glutton for more.
But so in the balance, it occurred to me, we were talking last episode, so usually it's 2 pastors, 2 comedians. I go in between. When you brought up your ordination, journey, call story, was basically from early on, no real break, went in. Bob has a similar story. So we've got our goody two-shoes side of the table who have always come up straight in the church, and we've got the in our 20s lived lives of hedonism and debauchery on this side of the table, because my call story was definitely a more roundabout way about it.
And as a goody two-shoes, I feel good that you can have, another team, and Trevor, can take over that majority. I always have to see the good in the scenarios.
Yeah,
my early 30s are offended that you left them out of that hedonism period, but we're getting there.
Yeah, Yeah, I say 20s, but my older daughter was born when I was 22, so I really had just like 5-6 years of turbocharged debauchery before becoming a parent, and still being a screw up as a parent, but then that was sort of the road back from just real dark places
what a
to
blessing,
be.
though. God will find a way.
Okay, should we jump straight into Scripture? Do we need to?
Yeah, I'm still just imagining your daughter reacting to that she saved you from turbocharged debauchery.
Yeah.
Did she get a ribbon for that or something?
She actually got punished to be raised by me. That I have a bit that I won't get into now, but I talk about that my admiration for Gen Z, because they were raised by us and didn't die. Like, that's just I mean, really, there was no chance for them.
Well, as someone who's seen your comedy, you always do. I don't know if I've told you this, but just from someone sitting in the audience watching, you have such an awesome way. You're very feathery with words, even if the words aren't exactly of a flightless bird. That feather, but I really love that turbocharged debauchery. Yeah.
Eric's comedy is the thing with feathers.
Okay, so are we going to jump straight into Scripture right now?
Let's read the Bible. Why not?
Okay.
All right. Why not? Today we are talking about the Transfiguration of Jesus. And that is found in Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 9. This episode is for the Transfiguration of Jesus, Sunday, February 11th. And our gospel reads as follows. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus.
Ooh, you stopped a paragraph earlier than that.
I'm sorry. Let me get that last one. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them not to tell anyone what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead.
Thank you. We need that there. We need to have the prediction of the crucifixion coming and the messianic secret. We have to bring that up.
So everybody else was looking at their handouts, and Eric kept the handout from me. It's over there on the shelf where I can't reach it. So I'm reading from my tablet right now.
Yeah. So, well,
it's good
to jump in 6 days later. Since you're not an ordained pastor at the table, we don't actually know what the 6 days later is referring to. So the question is, what happened 6 days earlier?
Ooh, so I can talk about 6 days. Well, yeah. So one of the things I read was with the comparisons to Moses going up on the mountain, where he brings 3 Israelites with him up onto the mountain to meet God and to receive the commandments. And it's like 6 days from when the presence of God descends on Mount Sinai to when they are able to go up safely and meet with God. So one of the things I read is that it's very seldom in Mark that he actually gives any kind of like the sort of chronology. Usually it's and then. He's really very immediate. So this and 6 days later seems like it might be a reference to Moses on the mountain.
Cool.
I'm currently rereading Jesus and the Jewish Roots of Eucharist, which I forget the name of the author who wrote it, but the big point of that is that there was a large segment of Judaism at the time that was actually awaiting a Messiah that was more like Jesus than we say they were awaiting. They were awaiting a new Moses that would lead them on a new exodus to a new promised land, which is largely what our confessions say Jesus has done. So the 6 days being drawn to the comparison of Moses on the mountain before Jesus is revealed, before Moses came back to give God's word to them, hits to where my mind is in the space that I'm in right now. That this is Mark saying, look, that's who he is. He's the new Moses. He's the one. The old Moses appeared with him, and he's the new Moses.
When I was a kid, we had a youth lock-in every Transfiguration weekend growing up. So from like 8th to 12th grade, we had a little sleepover, and we would do the service that weekend. And instead of having us do a sermon, usually they had us reenact the gospel, and they would have us reenact this Transfiguration gospel. And we had these youth group tie-dye t-shirts, so these big bright colors, and we would have someone be the narrator, and then everyone was kind of like the little tableau, like you would go up and pretend to be one of the people that appears. And right at the beginning was like our big effect. All it was someone was like hiding down behind a railing or a pew or something, and instead of the tie-dye t-shirt, they had a white acolyte robe on, like the kid that lights the candles, and they would just like stand up, and like the no one ever could, because you can't replicate this, but it was just a kid in an acolyte robe with like hands out, like, but also terrified and embarrassed to be up there. And I know the Transfiguration story by heart because of that, but have so many, and I was never Jesus, even though I think the church would have been okay if they would have had little girl Jesus up there. But it was usually one of the boys, and they just hated doing it. And they just popped up and like awkwardly were like, I'm transfigured Christ.
So,
do you know how your church came to have a Transfiguration lock-in custom? That's really interesting. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it was always youth weekend, and they had us do the service, and that was just how they picked it, which is kind of interesting because it's usually wintertime. But yeah, for years in a row, we told the story. And
did you bury the Alleluias as part of that service?
We must have.
For
Yeah.
For anyone who doesn't know the tradition, there's a tradition in several Christian denominations where you don't say Alleluia during Lent. And so as part of a getting the children involved, you make a big deal out of taking all the Alleluia banners down and putting them into a coffin type thing and burying them for Lent. And so that's just thinking of youth on Transfiguration. It seemed like you might be doing some sort of children's thing like that.
Probably. And I think it goes to kind of what sticks out in the text is that it's the stark difference between, you have the dazzling white, you have Elijah and Moses appearing, Peter wanting to stay there because it's so great, and it's kind of the majesty and mystery of God. But Jesus says, actually, we have to go and continue to work, and that stinks. Like, who doesn't want to stay up on the mountain? And so I think our like paltry dramatization of that was probably that reticence. You know, this is so cool. Why don't we get to stay here? Is the big question of Transfiguration.
So I have only once really been on a mountaintop, and it was a terrifying experience for me. I am not a serious hiker or backpacker, and I'm not real fond of heights. But on my internship in Washington, my buddy Mike was visiting, and we went hiking up. I can't remember the name of the mountain now. It was one of those where you park at the parking lot, only like about a half a mile from the top, and then you have a relatively easy hike. But I've got this great picture of me on the mountaintop there, and the person who took it managed to frame it so it looks like we are just totally out there hanging in the clouds. And I love that picture. As terrifying an experience as it was for me, it was also just transformative to see the world from way up high, and to have gotten there kind of sort of on my own steam, and to just be out there and exposed to the wildness of everything. It's the one mountaintop experience that I've literally had, and it comes up on my digital picture frame periodically, and I always have to stop and stare at it and think, wow, I was there, I did that happened.
I mean, as someone who's been on the top of many mountains, I think when we think of mountaintops, we picture the Rocky Mountains. But we're in the Mediterranean here. I mean, it's not the life-threatening mountaintops. You're not looking at cliffs that are falling down for thousands of feet ahead of you. I mean, these are places that really would be just an enjoyable place to stay.
It can get really foggy there, though.
So it can get foggy.
You might get your cloud photo with Elijah and Moses anyway.
But I look at the comparison between kind of the Appalachian Mountains here and the Rocky Mountains. I mean, the Appalachians are beautiful, but they're not intimidating. You can really walk around them quite easily and just enjoy your day. And that's more of the mountaintops that we've got in our biblical mountaintops. So my next question, Jesus is transfigured, without unpacking the actual word of what transfigured means. What's your take? Is he actually revealing the full divinity of God here, or is this just a reflection of the divinity to the other disciples?
Ooh, that's a nuanced question, isn't it?
It makes a really big difference. I tend to lean on that when he was transfigured, they witnessed Jesus in full divine form. But that puts us past justification, past sanctification, which are just terms, for those who don't know, of ways that God helps bring about holiness, to deification, really, that if the full divinity of God can enter our created world, that says a lot about the power of what God can do in making things holy. And so I tend to lean that way. I think God can put God's full godness imprint into the created world if God chooses to be. I mean, God's God, but that is, I know within certain traditions, that's a controversial statement about what Jesus is doing here, because the world is corrupt and fallen and couldn't take the full divinity of God into it.
That's a big one. I don't know. And I don't even know that I have one of like either or for you with it's this or that. But I think when in this point in Mark especially, or Mark 9, so you're getting closer to the end, but it's a little bit of a turning point. It's just kind of saying that we have to make a claim here about who Jesus is before he marches to the cross. And that this being, it even says, reminds us, this is my son, the beloved, listen to him. That, this is, maybe you disciples, you've joined and you just thought he was a real swell guy who had some like cool teachings and was doing some cool stuff and you like hanging out with the other disciples. But no, really, this is life-changing and creation altering.
And a lot of quills were spent writing about this by the ancients. I mean, because this was a real concern. What is the nature of the divinity that's revealed by Jesus there on the mountain? We've got the tradition that to see God face to face is like the end of you. That you're not coming back from that. That mortals cannot stand in the presence of God and live. And so to say that James and John and Peter saw something. Did they see the full presence of God revealed in Jesus Christ in that moment? Did they step outside of the world? Were they in eternity? Were they in heaven? Was it a revelation? I liked that Irenaeus, one of the church fathers, saw this as like, so when Moses saw God, when God revealed himself to Moses, God went by and covered Moses in a cleft of rock, and Moses only was able to see God's backside, which, insert your own joke here. And he did not see God's face. And so Irenaeus said that the flesh of Christ is the cleft in the rock where Moses stood when he saw God. that Jesus in the flesh is the thing that shields us so that we can stand in God's presence and that we can see God.
So you don't have the, like, Raiders of the Lost Ark face melting moment is why Jesus is flesh in front of us.
You want to avoid that in church.
Yeah.
It's hard enough to get people to show up without the flesh face melting.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite special effects in a movie because like everything just is so drastic and melty, but you can tell it's so fake. And then when the heads, it explodes.
Yeah.
The explosion at the end is always what gets me because it's just like eye socket explosion.
That's Spielberg, isn't it? Yeah. All of his special effects I like more than the computer stuff because I get lost. Now I will say, Eric and Bob, I don't know if I did so well on the first episode that you said, let's throw something infinitely more advanced at him and say, go ahead, jump in the ring. Because this is way more difficult for me to extrapolate anything. That's why I was like, I'll jump in on the Indiana Jones that I am quite familiar with. I could probably do an hour on that. But it's interesting because you had even said earlier, it's like 6 days later is the first words. 6 days later for what? This is so difficult because there's so little context for me. I feel like I would need more before and more after to really get anything out of it. But I had said on the episode prior, if anyone was here with us last time, a couple weeks ago, where for me, it's so much easier, and I guess I would ask for your assistance with this, to put things in like an allegorical or a metaphorical stance in where it relates to me and how it's applicable to something that I go through. So like the first thing that jumps out at me is we had discussed like the mountaintop, and you had said you're not much of a hiker. You've been on one mountaintop. You've been on a lot of mountaintops. I have never been on a mountaintop. I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who haven't, but the mountaintop to me could be a lot of different things. You know, it's not necessarily an actual physical mountaintop that you have to return from. I was just kind of throwing that in.
Yeah, that's a pretty standard metaphor that's used in the mountaintop experience. And for those listening on the podcast, I just did air quotes around that.
Helpful podcasting, air quote.
Yeah. But to give kind of context for it, so Ellen already said this is a pivot. So within Mark's gospel, there's kind of Jesus's ministry. This is... in Mark's gospel, from the beginning to the end, he's on a beeline to the cross. But for as much as you can have a pivot in Mark's gospel, this is the pivot where the beeline to the cross has become we're going there. And for within the liturgical season, so within church, right now, as we're recording this, we are in the season after Epiphany, kind of a liminal blank space between Christmas and Lent. It ends up feeling like it should be a more significant season. But this is the last Sunday before we enter Lent. Yeah. So we're also taking a pivot within the liturgical season. And so kind of this Jesus revealing something about his divinity is happening. And I guess if you're trying to put yourself into it, that's what our job in preaching is. We have to look at the people in the pews and say, how does that pivot fit into what's happening in your lives right now? I mean, where are we making the turn that we're coming out of that winter season and moving towards Lent? And I don't know about the two of you, Ellen and Bob, but I don't like to bring up that Easter's coming ever throughout Lent. I like Lent to stay in Lent.
That's weird, Eric. You gotta have a little bit of Easter, or else it's so bleak.
Oh, the world so much just wants to say that none of that exists, though. That everything is a montage, and then we win. And there's no, let's just dwell in the fact that training sucks.
So is that the point of we're talking about the transfiguration of Christ, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so is that the point of your own, are you supposed to be going through your own transfiguration? Is that, or did I invent that completely?
Well, I mean, so in the Bible, it does talk about that we're in the process of being changed, and that ultimately God's plan for us is to make us new. And there are these images of being clothed in Christ. So I think that's not an idea that's not in the Bible. But I think the Transfiguration is very definitely about something that is specifically Jesus being revealed in a way that up until now in the story he hasn't. But actually, this is not the first time in Mark's story that we've got these words about Jesus being said, because the first part of the story also has "This is my son," and that is words that are spoken over Jesus at his baptism. And then he goes about and he has his ministry kind of in the local areas there, and then he goes up a mountain, and again, "This is my son," and this is the moment that strengthens him, that sends him in the direction towards the cross, which is like the whole rest of the story. So I think you're not wrong that there is this sense of personal transformation that needs to take place.
If we're putting ourselves in the story, we're much safer to be the ones who witnessed it.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, what does it mean to you?
I don't have that much main character energy.
Well, I mean, there are times it's dangerous to place yourself in Jesus' place, but rather often Jesus is also living as an example of the godly life. I mean, that's in our liturgy, that you were given to us not only as a sacrifice for sin, but as an example of the godly life. And so you can say, what would Jesus do? I mean, the cheesy thing. But in this one, what would Jesus do? Reveal my divine identity is probably not the thing we should say we're going to do.
Well, but like on the far end of things, right? I mean, isn't this part of our confession that what God has done in Jesus Christ, He is doing for us? That Jesus became like us so that we can become like Him. He took on our humanity so that we will receive His divinity. The sweet swap, my professors used to call this. And that ultimately, I mean, not right now, but like when kingdom come, that is the story that, hey, look at my divinity will be part of my story and yours as well as adopted children of God.
And that's the controversy of if this was Jesus actually showing the full presence of divinity, that says something about our being able to take on the nature of Christ through baptism. I mean, if Jesus is able to enter his full divinity into the created world here, there is an actual nature of the full divinity of Christ we can take on in baptism, and that gets to become a really controversial statement. I like it. I mean, I do on Christmas. I preach that when God became incarnate, a little bit of God became part of the world. Like the world became holy because of that. It wasn't just coming down for the cross. The entrance of God into the created world is an important part of the story.
Is the finite capable of bearing the infinite?
Yeah, I mean, man.
Well, it kind of reminds me of scenarios where people try to think about like what is heaven like, because your question is this seeing God fully, and in this we're getting a little bit of a tale that he's transfigured. Jesus is transfigured, and to make it make sense to us, the writer of Mark uses his clothes were dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them, so a color we can't imagine. But when we get like I love The Good Place. There's spoiler alert, it's been on TV for long enough. The original Good Place is not an actual good place, but it's essentially just a town where everyone has a house that they would like, and people eat froyo, and it's just like idyllic. And so that's like you going to a folk concert at Hartward Acres heaven versus like the Sphere in Las Vegas. Like that's divinity, and what we imagine the ultimate kingdom of heaven to be like.
Hartwood to Vegas. That's
And sorry for anyone who's not from Pittsburgh. Hartward Acres is a lovely park that does free concerts provided by taxpayers' dollars.
And Vegas is
not.
Well, I would be remiss. I do have 3 pastors here. I should ask, because Ellen had mentioned it. What is heaven like?
Eric, you want to take that one?
Right after that, I will answer theodicy with a final, once and forever answer. I mean, that is, I mean, in the what is transfigured mean? I mean, outside of the actual changing of the form, but the nature that's revealed there can only be said in metaphor to now. I mean, that's the most honest answer I can give as to my take on that. Heaven is beyond what we can imagine. The controversy in this is that apparently 3 living people were able to witness this happen. And they can't express it outside of metaphor, but if we take it as the full divinity being revealed, that we can physically, as created people, witness it. We just can't express it.
And I guess it goes back to the special effects conversation, because that's how we imagine a lot of things. Like, is our special effects in thinking when God's kingdom is fully realized, the quote unquote, everyone's going to heaven type of time, are we like these big celestial cosmic people, or are we like happy because our dog has also come to heaven? And I there is no answer like what heaven looks like. We could write books and stories and all that kind of stuff, but for me it's always like the funnest thing. Like, are we gonna be like disco balls bouncing around somewhere, or are we gonna have the more like it's us getting together to do a podcast and really talk with one another about the wonderful creation we will be in the hereafter? Like, there's so many things it could be, and how cool is it for a disciple to experience what that inbreaking could look like? And because then it is a very homey thing after Jesus is transfigured and really cool folks come to visit, Elijah and Moses, the disciples are like, let's have dwellings, let's stay here and have a camp.
At the risk of sounding like a buffoon, because this isn't something certainly not something I've studied. It's something I grew up in. We talked about that on the last episode. But the concept of heaven, now that we're talking about it, because this always blew my mind. This is going to sound kind of silly, but I guess there's no stupid questions. Only stupid people. But like, what if heaven is in like the briefest amount of words I can describe it in is it's the perfect place, Okay, so what if my perfect is different than someone else's perfect? Is there like, I always thought of it, because I always thought of hell would be a personalized stop on the map, like that's your own thing. And it's so hard to wrap my head around that, because you had mentioned the word fun, and that's great. The word I would look for would be peace, because I've had too much darn fun down here. But I would look for the word peace, and it just that juxtaposition is really, they're two birds of the same feather, or two wings of the same bird. But it just is that a concept, or is that a completely man-made construct of like individualized perception of the afterlife?
I feel like it has to be. I mean, because I think that heaven is fundamentally relationship, that heaven is being in the presence of God and not being ashamed and afraid like our forebears Adam and Eve were, but just being in God's presence. And every relationship is different. I mean, the things that you love and you enjoy in each relationship, it's different from one person to the next. And so why would our perfect heaven with God not be individualized and not because like God customizes it, he checks the boxes and stuff on the form for us, but like because God's relationship with us is unique and individual to us.
See, I'm going to push back, because
please do.
Almost everything individual about our relationship with God is an invention of American Christianity, and almost everything biblical is communal and in relationship with others. And that whole, I've got a Jesus-sized hole in my heart that needs to be filled is such an invention of modern American Christianity.
No, that's not. That's Augustine.
The accepting...
that modern Christian St. Augustine who lived in Florida.
The way that it has been co-opted is... but, no, and I mean, to me, it's the message that's not in this reading, but we'll get as we go through Lent, that you have to be willing to die in order to receive eternal life. Means we've got to give up that clinging to something that is individualized and just for me.
So I think, Trevor, one of the things we're running into is a word I like, ineffable. The idea that it's just unspeakable.
I can F it.
No, but I like what you were. I think I was following what you were saying there. So
yeah, that there are some things that it just is very hard to put into words, and in some ways it's easier to say what a thing is not. Those things that are truly profound, it's easier to say, well, it's not this, and it's not this, and it's not like that. C.S. Lewis talked about that the people who have had truly profound visions and experiences of and knowledge of God, that they try to convey that to the rest of us mere mortals, and what they are able to express is more often, it's not like this, and it's not like this. God isn't like this, God isn't like that, and so there are like these kind of guardrails that are put up there. But to say affirmatively, this is what God is like, this is what heaven is like, is really hard. And if you are of a certain mindset, Lewis says, that can make it really easy to sort of tear apart faith by saying, oh, it's not like that. And you get a very superficial view of what faith is like. But that the people who have experienced it really directly, that they do have that profundity of the experience. It's just very hard to articulate.
Well, I've been asked several times, like I've had conversations with friends of mine who are not believers and like stubbornly, adamantly against it. And they'll ask me like, where is your proof of God? And I mean, I'm like, am I wearing a sign? Like, I didn't know I had it, but what I often will say in response is something along the lines of like, that which cannot be described or defined. Like anything's like everyone believes in beautiful mystery, or oftentimes people will say, you can't see God. Well, you can't see fear. You can't see gravity. There's those things like, and then people oftentimes say things along the lines of like, well, if there's a God, why do bad things happen? And for me, I always use the metaphor of me trying to understand why God does anything in my life is the equivalent of me taking an ant farm on the table, moving it to another table, and then asking the ants why I did it. Like it's that which can't be explained. It can't be understood in, my capacity.
So I actually found the writing from Lewis that I was referring to here, and I feel like I need to do him justice by actually letting him have his own words. This is from his book, Miracles, and he says, why are many people prepared in advance to maintain that, whatever else God may be, he is not the concrete, living, willing, and acting God of Christian theology? I think the reason is as follows. Let us suppose a mystical limpet, and a limpet is like, I think it's like a little mollusk kind of a thing, like a little squishy sort of a...
I'll take your word for it.
All right, yeah. Anyhow, so let us suppose a mystical limpet, a sage among limpets, who, wrapped in vision, catches a glimpse of what man is like. And Lewis is, of course, referring to humans. So what man is like. In reporting it to his disciples, who have some vision themselves, though less than he will have to use many negatives. He will have to tell them that man has no shell, is not attached to a rock, is not surrounded by water. And his disciples, having a little vision of their own to help them, do get some idea of man. But then there come erudite limpets who write histories of philosophy and give lectures on comparative religion, and who have never had any vision of their own. What they get out of the prophetic limpets' words is simply and solely the negatives. From these, uncorrected by any positive insight, they build up a picture of man as a sort of amorphous jelly. He has no shell. Existing nowhere in particular, he's not attached to a rock, and never taking nourishment. There's no water to drift it towards him. And having a traditional reverence for man, they conclude that to be a famished jelly in a dimensionless void is the supreme mode of existence, and they reject as crude materialistic superstition any doctrine which would attribute to man a definite shape, a structure, and organs.
No, Eric, that's British Christianity.
Yeah, you got it.
My favorite, if I can pawn off another's words and pretend they're my own for a brief moment, is just Carl Jung. And I'm going to paraphrase and for the sake of brevity, but it was basically like, do you believe in God? And his answer to that question was often, I know God. And I loved that answer. There's a whole lot of ways you can analyze it or pick it apart. But I hate the question, do you believe in God? Like, what, do I think he has what it takes to make it in comedy? You know, like, do I believe he's got the stuff? You know, I think that I know God is.
He's pretty funny.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Yeah.
Well, and going back to our conversation in last episode, this question about the nature of believing in God, and even the demonic beings believe in God, believe in Jesus in a certain way, and we'll not dig into that because that was last week's episode or 2 weeks ago's episode. But that was a big question about in what capacity is believing in Jesus the thing? Is it, just that we acknowledge him, or is there something deeper there?
The Lutheran confessions say that the faith that justifies is not just one that believes the history of God, but that believes its effects. In other words, that it is for you and for me also. But there's, in the last episode, you said that there was a period of time where you didn't believe in God, but you were still angry at him. Mm-hmm. And I think that anger at God is still a relationship with God.
I'm so grateful for that period I was angry at God. To me, and there are times where it's revelatory and like as though I know that it was with me all along, the Bible is littered with prophets who had nothing but negative things to say to God after God tried to tell them what they were supposed to do. That's... Makes sense.
The general path of a prophet is God says, you're going to be a prophet. And they go, you're really stupid, God. Have you figured who you're talking to?
Hey, and a couple of those prophets were on the mountain with Jesus, Moses and Elijah. They both had words with God.
Oh, thanks for bringing us back to the reading.
You bet. Well, anytime.
All right, so let's go there. So the traditional significance of it being Moses and Elijah is to say that it's the law and the prophets. I've read some other things about it. Ellen, Bob, Trevor, if you've got a take on why it's Moses and Elijah, you can jump in also. But why do you think these are the two that are chosen there?
Hey, who are Moses and Elijah? We shouldn't assume that people just automatically know who they are.
Yeah, so that's what, they're traditionally, at least for me traditionally, I don't know historically in Christianity what the tradition is that it's law and prophets, because Moses is the one who led them out of Egypt, received the Ten Commandments on Sinai, and then Elijah is kind of the original patriarch of the prophetic line of Judaism as they get into the Promised Land. And yet, Moses played a very significant prophetic role. He's the one who talked to God and came back and told the people about, and Elijah really played a large role in the establishment of some of the laws that were to take place in the Promised Land. And so it's not exactly a clear delineation.
Yeah, and the messianic promise that God would raise up for the people someday a prophet like Moses was one of the things that they were looking for. So, both a prophetic and a law-giving, leading sort of a personality there. Also, a couple of people who turned their back on courtyard lifestyle. Moses was raised in Pharaoh's court, and Elijah, I believe, would have been like a prophet in the king's court. Is that right? And then both of them turn and they go a different way. And so there is some connection there to Jesus himself, who in Philippians, we talk about that he forgoes all of the rights and the perks and the privileges of godhood, and he becomes like us. He has a wilderness journey, much like Moses and Elijah.
And both of them have mountaintop encounters with God. You've got Moses on Sinai, real famous story there of encounter with God. You've got Elijah, I believe I'm calling the right one, of calling down God in his prophet off with the prophets of Baal.
The prophet off. It is very much like a dance off.
Do you know the prophets of Baal story? Where so the prophets of Baal.
I do, but let's pretend our listeners don't.
So the prophets of Baal are challenging Elijah to your God's not a real God. He's coming back. Your God's not real.
Yeah.
And he says, so we're gonna have a little competition to see whose God's real. He says we're gonna build stacks of wood. Whoever's God lights the wood on fire is the real God. And so the prophets of Baal are doing it, and Elijah just talks smack through the whole thing. He says, "Where's your God? Did he go away? Did he go to the bathroom?" And then finally
he really does. That's like actually in there.
Roast battle.
Yeah, that is actually in the Bible that he makes fun of them that their God had to take a bathroom break, and then God lights Elijah's wood on fire, and then like the next chapter, Elijah's talking about killing himself.
I think I've read it in a commentary, but if I didn't, maybe I just dreamt it. But the people who were hearing the stories of Jesus and maybe eventually getting the stories of Mark were probably a people that, in the time of Jesus, folks went to synagogue on Sundays and knew the law and the prophets. And it was said that before the Messiah was there, that Elijah and Moses would show up. So for the gospel writer to be like, the Messiah has shown up, you have to have Elijah and Moses. So it's also just not a plot device, but kind of a, hey, sign indicator that we really do mean this as the people who are telling this story and giving you this information. This is most certainly the Messiah and we can prove it because Elijah and Moses are here.
Yeah, with the requirement of the return of Elijah, I'm always confused when John the Baptist is accused of being Elijah, his first thing is, no, I'm not Elijah. And then Jesus uses John the Baptist as, you've already seen Elijah. He came and they killed him. And there's definitely the writers of the Gospels had to lean on. I mean, Elijah has to come before the Messiah can return.
Hey, can we talk about the fact that Peter is practically wetting himself here? I mean,
I was going to bring up that same thing because fear is such a consistent thing in anyone's belief system, and I've read that very specific sentence. And the other question I had, because they may go hand in hand, is you had asked, was it Jesus presenting in the full divine form, right? My question is, and I don't know if it was answered in here, that I said right off the bat, this is a difficult thing for me to interpret. Very esoteric verse here, but why? Why was he revealing himself? Is that has that been explained?
No.
Okay, yeah.
Short answer,
no. Not only if he revealed his divine form, but why was he doing that 3 days before? Just in case anyone had any doubts.
Why is that's a difficult question for everything in all of the Gospels.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just even take it to this is the pivot, for as much as you can pivot, Mark, to go to the cross, and the question of why the cross. Because if you look at the cross just as something that was needed to happen for humans to be brought back into right relationship, God becomes a really abusive father.
Yeah,
and,
I get that. Yeah.
And so there really is, within people who study it, atonement theory becomes a real question as to what was the purpose of the cross? Why? And so why would Jesus have chosen this moment? Why would he have chosen this inner circle? I haven't had a direct conversation with Jesus.
Well, and we know it's not for some things. We know that it's not for recruiting purposes, at least in the immediate here, because
They were told not to tell anyone.
Yeah. I mean, that's the part that I didn't want to read.
Yeah.
They go down the mountain, and he says, "Just keep this between us." So for whatever it is, now until after the Son of Man is raised from the dead. So there does seem to be a sense that this is for our ears, like us now, that it was to be proclaimed once the fullness of what Jesus was up to was made known. But for right now, it's not, so that he can recruit more followers. I wonder if some of it isn't too to help those three who came up the mountain with him for what's coming.
Yeah.
Because as much of an ordeal as it will be for Jesus, it's also going to be a test for them. And, maybe this helps to strengthen them.
Maybe that's why Peter was terrified. Maybe he has a hard time keeping secrets.
Peter, the story of Peter is he's the best. We give him a lot of flack because he's the disciple that denies Jesus, but he also has this great narrative of kind of coming. He becomes a spokesperson for like revelations about who Jesus is, saying like, "This is my Lord and my God" is a big claim for someone to say about their pal, their teacher they're following around. And Peter does things like that, but the thing is, disciples are like us. They're human. And if we're looking to put, ourselves in there and say, yeah, if we saw the light of God shining before us and also people that were supposed to be dead appearing, and, this is a little bit of resurrection foretelling, all of that stuff is scary. So it's the disciples are held on of high esteem because they're God's, followers, and we're all God's chosen people. But they're also humans that are going through these wild and turbulent things with Jesus along with them.
Yeah, Peter is that guy who looks around and says, is nobody else going to say the thing we're all thinking? Okay, I'm going to just say it right here.
For the why question, I think the bolstering them for what is to come, part of my undiagnosed ADHD is the same way that just a couple of years ago now I picked up comedy, is get caught into little things that are just really exciting in the moment. And when they get hard, if you're going to continue with it, you have to somehow have that well of when it was exciting to draw back on. And if Jesus knows that we're about to go to where this is going to get dark and actually scary, not just a voice from the sky scary, you're going to need something to pull on.
That's where I was talking about the metaphor of the mountaintop. And then you'd said, well, there's more work to be done. And I think of that in my own life of like anything you go through that is a taste of success. It's like that reminder that there's more work to be done and this isn't the real final goal. So it's interesting. That's like the parallel.
And that's where your growth happens. I'm not original in saying this, but that growth happens in the valleys of life much more than on the mountaintops. The mountaintops sustain us, but in order to become the people that we need to be, we have to go back down. And that's one of the spins that gets put on Peter's, hey, let's build tents here. You really can't camp on those mountaintops. You can't prolong that experience artificially. You just have to, and actually this is like, so I'm a photographer, and one of the things that we are well known for, and especially as camera phones have taken over the world, is, people take pictures of things and they don't pay attention to the thing itself. You see an amazing sunset and you're so scrambling to point your phone at it or your camera at it that you don't bother looking at the damn sunset in the first place. And I feel like that is we want to build the camp there and spend our time on the mountaintop putting up the tents rather than like experiencing this moment that is actually happening, however brief it is.
If we draw back to what we were discussing in the last episode, is humor and laughter being a transitory, in the moment thing. It's this. Let's build the tents and stay here would be the equivalent of saying, "I want to keep laughing forever." Like it just doesn't work that way. You got to have the something when it comes.
I like that. Yeah.
Last thoughts.
And I think we have exhausted. That's it, people. We're out of words.
Are you saying we've had an exhausting podcast?
All right. I'll give both of you another chance to plug anything that you'd like people to be able to check you out on. Trevor?
Just Trevor Austin Comedy, all one word. It's that on any social medias. And like I said last time, all churchgoers may want to proceed with some caution on some of the comedy content. But thank you guys for having me.
Hey, we've got a disclaimer on our own podcast, so you're absolved.
It's been a good time. Ellen?
at Ellen Lundie, ELLENLUNDIE on Instagram. And I do have in my bio a Pittsburgh pastor and comedian. So you get maybe a little more comedy, just advertising shows and stuff. But sometimes I'll do some pithy things about church or just pictures of ministry and things going on.
Yeah, the walking that line of what to put out on a public presentation is difficult.
Yeah, another podcast.
So, well, it's been really fun. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thanks to anybody who is still listening. If you were offended, we're sorry.
And if you're still listening, it's kind of your fault, so we're not really sorry.
Since you are obviously manifestly still here, would you do us a favor? Please be sure to subscribe to CPTB wherever you get your podcasts and share it with your family, your friends, your pastors, anyone that you think might enjoy it.
Share it with your minions also. We're not picky.
Ooh, we like the minions. And we will be back in 2 weeks.
Until then, may the Holy Spirit do her thing in your life.